Hello. Today I'm going to talk about whether quants are really the rocket scientists. There's no doubt that in the quant finance field you will see many PhDs and postdocs working. That does not mean that everyone is a rocket scientist. It's a metaphor that is used often for the quant professionals, but I don't think that each and every quant is a rocket scientist. You won't find many professionals in the quant finance world who have got great scientific achievements behind them. No doubt many of them have PhDs and postdocs in scientific fields such as physics and maths and engineering, computer science. But rarely have I come across quants who have done amazingly well in scientific research and yet they chose a career in finance. On the contrary, I have found most people coming from the PhD background they did not find a good job in academia, and that's the reason why they moved to finance. Right? And just because they have PhDs and postdocs and doctorate behind the name, people think that okay, these are rocket scientists, people who have done great work in the scientific and engineering world, and now they have chosen to work in the field of finance. It's the opposite of that, right? The best talent in scientific world and engineering world, they stay in academia, they stay in research, they do they do technical research in physics, maths, neuroscience, biological science, engineering, computer science, and so on. Rarely you will find a field medal winner working in finance. There may be exceptions. There were times when Nobel Prize winners in economics worked in quant finance. You won't find a Nobel Prize winner in physics working in quant finance, right? And you can also question the Nobel Prize in it, whether it's the real Nobel Prize or not, right? But you'll never find a top mathematician or top physicist working in finance. There are some exceptions, but most physicists and mathematicians who work in the field of finance, I would say they are not the best physicists or mathematicians. They could not find a proper job in academia, and that's the reason why they have moved to finance. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that to call them rocket scientists and some top scientific minds, I would say that is a bit of an overstatement. Having said that, there are some exceptions, by the way. I've come across some really great guys who could have got a good job in academia had they stayed a bit longer. They had some patience to find a job in academia. But that's not always the case. There's more people without strong academic or scientific achievements than there are. So that's something I would say a bit of a stretch when you say all quants are rocket scientists, right? You probably have come across articles where it's mentioned rocket scientists of Wall Street. Well, there are some people, no doubt, but not everyone, right? Jim Simon, for example, one quant was often cited as a rocket scientist. There's no doubt he was a great mathematician. He was a professor in Princeton University, later on in Stony Brook, I think. But that's an exception, right? You won't find a Princeton mathematician leaving his job at Princeton and then going to work for a large investment bank or a hedge fund, right? If you look at techniques used in the field of quant finance, right, they're not too challenging for a top mathematician, right? On the trading side, most of the techniques used are related to regression or time series forecasting. The mathematics as such is not very difficult. Trading strategy may be very unique and something that you have to do research on, but the mathematics behind it may not be too sound or too complicated or too interesting for a top mathematician or a physicist. You go to the most sales side, right, where people do valuations of different financial assets. The mathematics looks more sophisticated. However, it's not very difficult either. Anyone who has done a good bachelor program in mathematics, physics, had studied stochastic calculus in undergraduation or post graduation, I'm sure he would find the mathematics behind derivative pricing quite straightforward, right? So that's also not too difficult for a top mathematician, or that won't attract top mathematicians to come and work there. On the risk management side, right, building risk management models, many quants work in risk management. In fact, risk management attracts the most number of people from the quantitative science departments such as physics, maths, and engineering compared to the other forms of quantitative areas in finance, right? And the models used in risk management are also not that difficult. Anyone with an undergrad or postgrad degree in math, science, statistics, economics will be able to do such modeling work. You don't need a theoretical physics PhD to do such work. Although there are many theoretical physicists who work on simple econometrics models used in the field of quantitative risk modeling. So I beg to refer that all quants are rocket scientists, or should be called as rocket scientists. There's nothing wrong in giving a bit of prestige to the people who are very qualified and have just way too many degrees, but that's not the way to look at it. Simply because if you are someone who doesn't have a PhD from a really prestigious university, you just have a master's degree in some quantitative field, you should still be able to find jobs and do really well in quant finance, right? There is also a perception that you need double PhDs to work in quant finance. Well, I have never met anyone who has done two PhDs. I mean, why would anybody do two PhDs? I mean, even the Nobel Prize winners, the greatest of the greats scientists, did just one PhD. Why would anybody do two PhD? I never understood that point. I have never met anyone with two PhDs. In fact, I would find that very strange. That why would anybody do that? Right. So you will never find, almost never find people with double PhDs working in finance. And after doing two PhD, if someone is working in finance, I would say something is wrong with that person. Okay, so the bottom line here is that there's no doubt quant finance is very quantitative, but it's not as quantitative as people think it is. It is less quantitative than, let's say, doing research on string theory or doing research on some complicated pure mathematics, right? I mean, you don't have to be able to understand research papers from Terence Tao to be able to work in finance, in quant finance. Okay, that's never the expectation, right? As long as you have a fair bit of understanding of the undergraduate level maths, right? Numerical analysis, real analysis, coordinate geometry, statistical analysis. Somebody who has done statistical inference, regression, and that kind of stuff, time series modeling, right? These are things you learn already at undergrad and postgrad level. You don't need more than that in order to work on such areas. And the research as such in finance is a lot of that is related to common sense and less about the mathematics. The mathematics is just a tool, just a means to an end. The mathematics itself will not make a model or a strategy well. You have to have common sense, or you should be able to build something unique and then use mathematical models to generalize things and to automate things and so on, right? So here this is the point: if you're not a PhD, you're not a postdoc holder, you do not have two PhDs, you still can work in quant finance, and there is always need of people with quantitative skills. Whether you have got it in your undergrad or postgrad, you'll still be fine working as a quant in large investment banks, commercial banks, hedge funds, and trading firms. In fact, many trading firms nowadays hire undergrads from good universities with just a bachelor in computer science or maths, right? That's certainly is the case. That has, in fact, the new development I see, that it's becoming more tech driven. So people with good tech skills, less mathematical skills, are preferred in some of the quant funds, right? That it was very difficult to earn 2 decades back when there was entry barrier and you had to have a PhD back then, but things have changed, right? Not that I'm saying that if you are a PhD, you are not good enough. I think you are in fact better. You will be preferred still in 2025 most quant firms. But that's not a prerequisite. That's the point I'm trying to make in this video. All right, thanks guys.